Hello and welcome to another episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codo Man. Well, folks, we are here for another episode of Codo Cinema, and this one I'm going to be talking about another film that came out in 2025, but this time, this will be from another film studio that, quite honestly though, is making the name for itself. And this movie I'm going to talk about, this one's a recent movie that just came out this year. It just came out April 11th of 2025, and that movie is the 2025 The King of Kings movie. Now, The King of Kings, which is the one that came out in 2025, is an American animated Christian film written, directed, and edited by Seong Ho Jang, who also produced the movie with Woo Hyung Kim, to which Woo Hyung Kim also served as the cinematographer on this movie. And the film is loosely inspired by the children's book The Life of Our Lord by Charles Dickens, and the film stars the voices of Kenneth Branagh, Uma Thurman, Mark Hamill, Pierce Bronson, Roman Griffin Davis, Forrest Whitaker, Ben Kingsley, and Oscar Isaac. This film came from Angel Studios and was released on April 11th of 2025 in the United States. And the animation for this movie was produced by MoFac Studios, with music provided by Kim Tae Seong. And of course, the film's the plot of this film follows Charles Dickens, a young author who narrates the biography of Jesus Christ, and together he and his son Walter embark on an adventure as the master storyteller engages the boys' vivid imagination. Now that sounds like a very good plot. Now, to anybody who is listening to this episode, you're all probably wondering how I was drawn into this movie. Well, to be quite honest with you, I've seen the films. I have seen the film's trailer on YouTube. Plus, there's been a lot of social media posts on Facebook and Instagram of this movie, including some sneak peeks. And of course, I believe that was a brilliant way for the film to be marketed, right? And I thought it was a brilliant way to market this movie, because in today's world, there are some movies that are being, thrown under the radar, right? Like they're not being like spread out, like being marketed as well. Although with this one, The King of Kings, the one that just came out, this one got marketed through social media, for example, like Facebook and Instagram, and I'm pretty sure other platforms as well, including YouTube. That's what got a lot of people's attention, because there's a lot of people out there who really went to see this movie. And I'm not making this up. On the day that it opened, I went to see this movie with my twin brother Mike, and it was a nighttime showing at the 715 at the Cinemark Seven Bridges Theater in Woodridge, Illinois. Almost the entire theater was packed for that movie. I'm not making this up. The entire theater for that showing was packed. That's how big this movie is. Now, sure, yeah, it may not be much for some people, but for this one, it is, because this movie is based on a story that is very important to life. I mean, we're talking about the life of our Lord Jesus Christ, right? And this is that movie. And and of course, going into this episode, I will be breaking down the movie, while also giving in my own background on some of the biblical movies. And then I will also, break down some scenes that I really really enjoyed from this movie, because there was a lot going on in this movie, especially for a film that is 101 minutes. So this movie's runtime is 101 minutes, which is basically an hour and 41 minutes. And in and of course, in minutes as a whole, that's 101 minutes right there. Just to let you all know. So anyway, just to give it my background on biblical movies, and The King of Kings, this one just came out in 2025, is one of them. So I haven't seen that many biblical movies, but I have heard a lot. I have heard many of these movies. I have heard of many of these movies, especially in the biblical form, or in the world of Christianity, if you know what I'm saying, right? So, just to give it my background, I have seen films like I have seen films. For example, I have seen the Father Stew movie, which is the one with Mark Wahlberg. I thought that one was pretty good. And then, of course, I'm pretty sure everybody's gonna. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will remember this movie, especially from Mel Gibson, which is basically the Passion of the Christ, which is basically which is basically also this movie also delves into the Passion of the Christ as well. And we also have the DreamWorks animated movie, The Prince of Egypt, which is basically which is basically the animated movie of the Ten Commandments, which is the animated movie of the Ten Commandments from DreamWorks. Although title wise, it's called The Prince of Egypt. It's with Val Kilmer, who played Moses, and then Ralph Fiennes played Ramses in that movie. And while I'm also at it, the 1956 Ten Commandments movie, which starred Charlton Heston as Moses and Yul Brynner as Ramses in that movie. And speaking of which, there was also Ben Hur with Charlton Heston as well. There was also a King of Kings movie that came out in the '60s as well, and that's just basically my background on those movies. Now, as for this movie, The King of Kings, the one that just came out, obviously it is loosely based on the children's book The Life of Our Lord, to which Charles Dickens wrote. So that will transition into the background for the book that Charles Dickens wrote. So The Life of Our Lord is a book about the life of Jesus of Nazareth, written by Charles Dickens. Everybody's gonna remember Charles Dickens for the Christmas Carol story that he wrote, and to which that was actually spoiler alerts, and we are going to spoilers into this movie too. By the way, that is also brought up in this, and that is also brought up in this movie as well. So Charles Dickens wrote The Life of Our Lord for his young children between 1846 and 1849. At about the time he was writing David Copperfield. The Life of Our Lord was published in 1934, 64 years after the death of Charles Dickens. And Charles Dickens, he wrote The Life of Our Lord, as I mentioned, to his children, to whom he read it aloud every Christmas, and he strictly forbade publication of the life during his own lifetime, and begged his sister-in-law Georgina Hogarth to make sure that the Dickens family would never even hand the manuscript or a copy of it to anyone to take out of the house. His handwritten manuscript was passed down to Georgina Hogarth after Dickens' death in 1870. And on her death in 1917, it came into the possession of Sir Henry Fielding Dickens, Dickens' last surviving son, and the Dickens family continued to read it at every Christmas, and at the author's request delayed publication until the last of Dickens' children had died. The book begins, and I quote, "My dear children, I am very anxious that you should know something about the history of Jesus Christ. For everybody ought to know about him. No one ever lived who was so good, so kind, so gentle, and so sorry for all people who did wrong, or were in any way ill or miserable as he was." Now that's putting it very well right there. There then follows a simple account of Jesus' life and teachings with an occasional touch of Dickens' humor. You never saw a locust because they belonged to that country near Jerusalem, which is a great way off. So do camels, but I think you have seen a camel at all. At all events, they are brought over here sometimes, and if you would like to see one, I will show you one. Like I said, the story itself was later published in 1934, which is basically 64 years after Charles Dickens have died. And then, with that being said, years later, would be would that story would become an animated adaptation for the King of Kings movie, which was released by Angel Studios on April 11th of 2025. Now, Angel Studios, like this studio was founded on March 25th of 2021. And now how I heard of this studio is because the studio released a movie in 2023 called Sound of Freedom, which came out on July 4th of 2023. And of course, that movie also came out around the same time in July, around which is around the same time the fifth Indiana Jones movie came out as well. And 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 Sound of Freedom is not the only project that Angel Studios did. They're also responsible for the television series The Chosen, which is also playing the Last Supper as well. There's also other films from Angel Studios, such as After Death, The Shift, Cabrini, Sight, Sound of Hope, The Story of Possum Trot, Bonhoeffer, Homestead, Brave the Dark, Rule Breakers, and then of course there's also The Last Rodeo, which actually is one of the trailers that I actually saw when seeing The King of Kings as well. And there's also a few other projects that they're doing as well. And that's pretty much it for now. That's pretty much it for now. As I mentioned, I saw this movie on April. I saw this movie in theaters with my brother Mike, and it was a full house. And that was when it first opened. And it says a lot when you have a full house, knowing the fact that this movie is going to be good. And I can actually agree with that. Now granted, I know not everybody's going to be on board with this movie because there's a lot of people who have different opinions on movies, especially films that are based on, especially films that are basically, Christian films or biblical films, so to say, just to let you all know. And look, I understand everybody's going to have different opinions on that, but to me, I believe The King of Kings is actually a really good movie from Angel Studios. Now, anyway, I am going to break down this movie. Let me break down this movie, shall we? The movie sees Charles Dickens as a master storyteller whose words have touched the world for many years. And with so much prolific talent, such as his, comes at a price, however, and while Dickens was a loving father, his work often kept him distant from his family. In particular, he struggled to connect with his youngest son, Walter, a 5-year-old dreamer inseparable from his best friend, Willa the cat. Walter lives in his own imagination and sees the world in a unique way. So this movie up. So basically, going into the opening of the movie. By the way, forgot to mention we are going into spoiler. By the way, we are going into spoiler territory right here. So spoiler alert. So in the opening of the movie, Charles Dickens was reading a performance at a London theater, which is basically the Christmas Carol, which is basically the Christmas Carol story that he's reading, and it opens up with Ebenezer Scrooge, going out in a snowstorm, which is basically, during the time of basically, the ghost of Christmas future, and Scrooge is in the graveyard confronting his grave, realizing that this is the man who basically, the man, and this is the body that he saw on the bed. If you remember that story, like who was that man that we saw lying on the bed? That was basically Ebenezer Scrooge, and of course Scrooge, being a grumpy, greedy old grump, he basically died being a greedy, mean old man. And Ebenezer sees his name, like saying, "I'm not the man I once was. Please, spirit, I could change. I could change." Like that's how this movie opens up. Unfortunately, this whole story gets interrupted. This scene gets interrupted by Charles's son Walter, and is being rudely interrupted by Walter, including the cat Willa, and he doesn't seem to like Dickens. He doesn't, and he's a kid, right? Walter is basically a kid. He's more into kings, right? Like King Arthur. That's how this movie opens. That's how this movie opens up. He's like he has his own, toy sword, and he's pretending to be like King Arthur, and there's a bit of laughter from the audience. So it seems like the kid is giving the audience some humor right there. So there's even a moment where he flies out of the curtain and onto the stage. Everybody's laughing up to the point where Walter and Willa the cat were basically, creating a scene, creating a King Arthur scene right there, and it was actually pretty. It was actually a pretty funny moment right there, and Charles had to play along for a little bit up until the end of the scene where Charles Dickens tells his son, his tone is very low. He's mad at Walt. Like he's saying, "You are not King Arthur." Like that's what Charles says to his own son Walter. And then of course Walter and the rest of his family was there too. They all went home, and Charles was the last one coming inside. But Charles Dickens was absolutely exhausted and at one point, Charles's wife, Catherine, who's being voiced by Uma Thurman, and also to mention, Charles Dickens is voiced by Kenneth Branagh. Kenneth Branagh, who voiced Charles Dickens in The King of Kings, he has made a name for himself in a number of film roles he has acted, but also directed too. He's a director as well. Kenneth Branagh played Hercule Poirot in 3 of the Agatha Christie film adaptations of Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, and A Haunting in Venice, to which he played Hercule Poirot, but also directed all 3 of those movies. He played Gilderoy Lockhart in the second Harry Potter movie, and he also directed the first Thor movie with Chris Hemsworth. And on top of that, he was also in a movie called Henry V. I believe that's the name of the title, which came out in the late 80s, and he was also in Hamlet as well. Plus, he made he collaborated with director Christopher Nolan on 3 of his movies, which was 2017's Dunkirk, including the Tenet movie and the Oppenheimer movie. So Charles Dickens' wife Catherine tells her husband to, how about you read him a story about forgiveness, right? And of course, this is also hinted in the movie, and she finds like a story. Like the cover of the story was torn apart, and that's the title, and that's the story about the life of our Lord Jesus Christ. So Catherine urges Dickens to tell his son the story of the true king, and Charles Dickens created a story for not only for the world but just for his family, especially for Walter. And he would tell the story that means everything to him, the story of Jesus Christ, the greatest story ever told. At first, Walter doesn't seem that interest at all after the whole debacle in the theater, but of course, Walter was more into King Arthur legends, right? But Charles is like, well, this story is about a king, the King of Kings, and Walter was on board with it. So, settling down by the fire, Charles describes to Walter the world of long ago, which was basically 2,000 years ago. And as the great storyteller tells him of the birth of Jesus Christ, and Walter's imagination is ignited. He sees the old stable, the visit from the angel, the 3 wise men, and the shepherds. He is shocked by the tyranny of King Herod as he searches for the newborn king at all costs. He is thrilled by the daring escape that sends Mary and Joseph into hiding to keep Jesus safe. Now I'm going to pause for a second. So this is basically opening up with the nativity story, which is basically Mary and Joseph giving birth to Jesus Christ, the baby Jesus Christ in the stables in the little town of Bethlehem, right? And Walter was literally on board. And while I'm also at it, Walter is being voiced by Roman Griffin Davis, to which I think a lot of people will remember Roman Griffin Davis for he Roman Griffin Davis played he played JoJo in JoJo Rabbit, which came out in 2019. Just to let you all know, and dialing back down to Uma Thurman's been in a lot of movie roles. She was in the Pulp Fiction movie, and she was also in the two Kill Bill movies, to which the Kill Bill movies and Pulp Fiction were directed by Quentin Tarantino, and then of course she was also Poison Ivy in the infamous Batman and Robin movie. Those are some of her roles that she did. I'm actually happy that this is another movie that she actually took, voicing Charles Dickens' wife. That's actually pretty. That's actually pretty nice. And then King Herod is actually voiced by Mark Hamill, to which Mark Hamill played Ozzy. He played Luke Skywalker in Star Wars movies. He was also the Joker in the Batman animated series, and he also played Burt Kreischer's father in the Machine movie that came out in 2023. And plus, speaking of kings, Mark Hamill also played a king, but or should I say, Lord in the Avatar: Last Airbender show as Fire Lord Ozai. Mark Hamill has done a lot of movie roles, including voiceover roles too, and him voicing King Herod is actually a very interesting take right there, because I got a little bit of Fire Lord Ozai vibes a little bit, but for what he did, for what Mark Hamill did in this movie, he actually did a very good job voicing this character. He actually did a very good job voicing King Herod. And then this, of course, we also get into and of course the three wise men were also there too. The three wise men who visited baby Jesus, giving him the gifts for the king. The gifts for a king, like gold, frankincense, and myrrh. That's what we saw in the beginning of this movie as well. And also to mention this, Walter is seeing all of it. Like it's like the story is bringing us into this. It's like the story is bringing is like bringing us into this world as if we were there, right? And that's how this movie is. This is what this movie is doing. I really love how it works. Like Walter is seeing all of it, like as if he was there, witnessing all the entire story of Jesus Christ. And even Charles Dickens was like, "Well, son, how about we help him along the way?" And that's what actually happens in this movie too. So so with Charles Dickens' words in his ears and his imagination running wild, Walter feels a deep connection with this story, and truly feels he is able to experience what it was like in Christ's time. From his humble beginnings to forming his band of faithful disciples to performing miracles, Walter vividly sees and feels all that is happening. As the story unfolds, Charles and Walter's relationship begins to deepen. And of course, to continue forward, Jesus is speaking in the temple at the age of 12, and Jesus tells Mary and Joseph, which is basically the parents, that he must be about his father's business. Then comes the baptism by John the Baptist, the temptation by Satan in the wilderness, using the Matthew version, and recruiting of the 12 apostles, starting with Peter and Andrew. And in between the different, vignettes from the Gospels are scenes with Walter, Charles, and Catherine. And of course, in one, Walter asks if Jesus is going to fight a dragon, and doing typical child things, which Dickens counters with great storytelling about the King of Kings. And of course, this story continues with Dickens telling his son about the woman caught in the act of adultery, the Sermon on the Mount, Peter walking on water, and the raising of Lazarus. And each one of these stories, the Pharisees and Sadducees, if I'm saying this correctly, I apologize for mispronouncing any of these names. I really do apologize. But anyway, just to move forward, the Pharisees and the Sadducees are getting more and more upset with Jesus, and they finally decide that Jesus needs to die. So they give Judas 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus. Then at the Last Supper, Jesus washes the feet of the apostles and does the foot washing. He also tells Peter that he came to serve, not to be served, and tells Judas to do what he has to do. So at the very least, Jesus knows what is going on, what was about to go down, and the members of the apostles couldn't believe what's going on. But of course, this is basically what's happening at this. This is what's happening at this point. It's like Jesus knows what's going to happen next. And then later on in this movie, there's several points where Walter is confused by the story, and his father Charles explains how or why something happened by referring to another biblical story. For instance, he explains Jesus taking our sins by having an animated sequence about Adam and Eve disobeying God. This is basically, this is basically, the apples from the trees because of the temptation from that serpent, which is basically Satan disguised as the serpent. And then there's also mentions of the splitting of the Red Sea by Moses, which is actually in an animated sequence as well. So a good mention. So that's actually a very good mention of the Ten Commandments and and of course the story of Adam and Eve. So very good mentions right there in this movie. So anyway, just to continue forward. To continue forward, Walter is watching the events unfold, and he feels the pain of Christ's persecution, crucifixion, and ultimately to his resurrection. And Charles guides his son through his sadness and helps him to understand that the story had to end this way. And as Jesus is resurrected to bring his light into the world, the bond between father and son is made solid. Charles and Walter at last find the connection they were seeking, and through the power of story, father and son form a bonding of love that will last their lifetime. And that's basically about it for this breakdown right there. And what I just said it is a very good story. Like the way of how it's presented in this movie. This is basically going back and forth between Charles Dickens and his son, and then of course the story, and then of course the actual events that came into the fold for Jesus Christ as well. This will definitely segue into the scenes that I really like from this movie. So anyway, I enjoyed the scenes I enjoyed the scenes with Charles Dickens and his son. Of course, that's like one of the few things to mention from this movie, because this is Charles Dickens telling his son about this story, right? And I believe it was a very good way to ignite your son, to get your son or daughter interested. Because think about it, this is like a story you could tell to your children, right? And get them to spark their interest, because the story about the King of Kings is arguably the greatest story ever told, right? And of course the confusion between Walter really sold it pretty well, because Walter's confused about like what his father is telling up until the very point of what's going to happen next. And on top of that, even Walter gets really interested on some of the moments in this story, like another scene, because another scene I want to bring up, and this is basically Walter in that world. This is Walter and Charles in that world. So basically, as I think of it as if they were actually there, seeing the events unfold. So some more scenes to mention. The fisherman scene, right? And the fishermen, they're basically they're fishing. They're fishing on the Sea of Galilee, and of course the two fishermen sees Jesus Christ, and of course the two fishermen were basically their names were Simon, although he's later called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They're catching fish in the lake. Unfortunately, they had bad luck catching fish. Of course, one of them sees Jesus. Both of them saw Jesus Christ, and Jesus was like, "Why don't you go out And Jesus was like, "Why don't you go out further into the lake? There'll be more fish. There'll be more fish over there." But the other fishermen had doubts. But of course, the fisherman that, of course, Jesus told him to, just to, trust him, right? So the other fisherman acknowledges and trusts Jesus, and from that there forward, there were more fish in the boat, and Walter is in that boat. He sees it all. He sees a huge pile, net full of fishes inside the boat. And of course, this is basically coming from Matthew 4:18 through 22. As Jesus walked along the shore of Lake Galilee, he saw two brothers who were fishermen, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew, catching fish in the lake with a net. Jesus said to them, "Come with me, and I will teach you to catch people." At once they left their nets and went with him. And he went on and saw two other brothers, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They were in their boat with their father Zebedee, getting their nets ready. Jesus called them, and at once they left the boat and their father and went with him. And Charles Dickens also mentioned about this too. And something also to bring up too, like there are mentions from the story and of course scriptures from the Bible and the gospel of the events that are going on. And I like the way of how that is incorporated in this movie. And then of course more people came to follow as well. And of course, another scene. There is a scene where Jesus Christ gets baptized by John the Baptist, to which it is also mentioned that Jesus and John the Baptist are relatives. And Jesus Christ gets baptized by John the Baptist. There's even a moment. Where Jesus is being tempted by Satan, and of course, he is not falling for Satan's tricks. There's even a moment where Jesus is standing on top of a temple, and Satan. We don't see Satan in this movie. It's just basically, the laws of it's basically nature. It's basically like this it's basically, there's basically a huge dust devil that is basically circling around Jesus, just get him to tempt, right? This is the temptation, but of course Jesus resisted the temptation of Satan. So at one point he trying to tell Jesus, if you really are the Son of God, why don't you try to jump off of this temple? Jesus didn't do that. He doesn't want to be tempted by the enemy. And you know what? That scene alone was a good scene right there. Kind of shows you that Jesus is not falling for Satan's evil tricks. He's not falling for that. And Walter sees it all. There's also another scene in this movie. It's the scene where Jesus Christ helps a poor man who is blind, and of course the man tells Jesus, "Hey, I cannot see. Can you help me?" And Jesus was like, "If you have faith, I can help you, and it will be done." And he puts his hands on the man's head, and of course tells the man to now open your eyes. And of course, the man is no longer blind. So this is basically Jesus performing miracles on people, right? Performing miracles on people, helping people out. There's even another moment where he helps a man who is unable to walk, and it's also brought up that this man had a stroke and he's unable to move. So Jesus was able to help that man too, and this man was able to walk home, holding his, I forgot what it's called. It's some walker. I believe it's one of those bed walkers. I believe that's what it's called. I don't really remember. It's like, like one of those, like, it's one of those beds that you get picked up and walked away. That's kind of like what is being shown. That's kind of what it is. I don't remember exactly what it's called. But yeah, that was a miracle that Jesus performed on that man who was unable to, walk because of that stroke. And then there was even another moment. There was also another moment. There's also another scene. Another scene that I actually liked from this movie was where Jesus sees a crowd of people surrounding this woman, because there is a story, and it's also mentioned in the gospel, about a woman who was caught in the act of adultery. And there are these men. There are men, including some elderly men, who are holding up stones. They're about to, throw stones at this woman. And what I really like about this moment is that it cuts back to Walter and Charles Dickens at the fireplace at their home. And Walter's like, rocks? But wouldn't that hurt that woman? And Charles is like, I mean, well, yeah. We'll see if Jesus could pull out his magic sword. And this is, of course, referring to the sword that Walter was holding, and he called that sword Excalibur. And it cut. And of course, Charles sits at the chair for a while, sips a cup of tea, and Walter's like, wait. What's gonna happen next? What's Jesus gonna do next? Charles continues the story. He says, well, Jesus holds out his finger and draws in the dirt, and of course, Jesus tells the people, all right, fine. To anyone who has never sinned, can throw the first stone. Go ahead. I'll wait. That's what he said to those who were holding the stones in their holding the rocks in their hands, right? And the way how it was delivered, like Oscar Isaac, who voiced Jesus in this movie, he delivered that pretty well in this movie. And he waits for a little bit. He's waiting for anybody to make a move on that woman, which is basically throwing rocks. And he was like, "Go ahead, I'll wait. What are y'all doing?" So, but it turns out after the men heard what he said, they all dropped their stones suddenly, like like cowards, I believe. And they all started like one by one. They all dropped their stones and started started to walk away from this woman. And Jesus is like, "Have you all sinned? Huh? Imagine that." So yeah, so it was basically like he told those who were holding the stones that if they have never sinned can throw the first stone. And of course, this is also a commandment from the Ten Commandments: "Thou shalt not commit adultery." And this is like also mentioned in the Ten Commandments. They also brought up the name of Moses as well. And of course, after that moment where the villagers who were holding the stones, the men villagers, they all walked away. They all walked away from this woman, and it was just Jesus and the woman. And Jesus walks over to the woman and says, "It's okay. They're gone now. No one's here to condemn you, and I am not condemning you." And the last thing that Jesus says, "Now go, and from now on, sin no more." And that was basically it. And cutting back to Charles and Walter, Charles is like, and he did all that without a magic sword. And that was a sneak peek that they actually, and that was a sneak peek that was actually put onto social media as well. And I really liked that scene right there. Like, it was a very good scene right there. And of course, told from the perspective of Charles Dickens as well. And and there is a funny moment where Walter tosses up his sword, and it lands stick first onto the pillow parts of the chair. It's just a funny moment right there. So you could definitely tell right away that Walter was really interested in that story. And then there's also another moment I liked in this movie is the servant on the mount is basically the on the mount servant on the mount, which is basically the moment where a lot of people are basically, I guess you could say this the pre I guess you could say it's the mass on the mount. I guess you can say where everybody's listening to Jesus, who's basically the teacher, right? Who's basically their teacher, their guidance, their healer, every any they're right there. They're the teacher, guidance, healer, and so forth. And it's a very nice moment too, especially the moment where Walter was there. Walter was sitting there holding a jar of cookies or biscuits, I believe. Or biscuits, I believe. And of course, a lot of the members were obviously hungry. This is like the aftermath portions are basically hungry, I believe. And of course, what I really liked this part really got me was when Walter passes the cookie jar to some of the members who are sitting with Jesus, and instead of like serving cookies, it's basically bread and fish. And of course, Jesus used his miracles to make more bread and fish to pass along to groups of people who are on the mount right there. It's a very nice moment right there. Of course, moving forward, we get another scene. There's another scene that I actually liked, and it's basically during It's basically during the ocean sequence where or lake sequence, or I think it's a lake sequence or maybe ocean sequence, I believe, where where members of the apostles were fighting treacherous storms and big waves, to the moment where Peter, and it's a moment where he walks on water while seeing Jesus, because he is still having faith in himself, but unfortunately there's a moment where Peter doubt himself, and he falls into the water, about to float down to the bottom, but thankfully Jesus hold out his hand and brings him back up. And he told him that he doubt himself, and as long as you have faith, and he told him that he doubt that Peter doubt himself. And that's something that I really like, because there are some people who really have doubts about life, and a scene like this, like he had doubts about trying to like get across to make it to Jesus, right? But unfortunately he doubts himself, fell in the water, about to drown, right? But thankfully Jesus was able to bring him back up, and he lost a little bit of that faith, right? Peter lost a little bit of that faith, right? Because if he's able to hold on to that faith, then it could be done. Him and his members getting back to shore safely, right? And then we move forward, and then of course that Lazarus moment where Jesus was able to bring someone back from the dead. The person Lazarus died for a few days, and he was inside this little cave, and there's like a little rock tomb, this little rock door that's shaped like a circle that is basically closing the tomb. So he opens it up, and then of course he tells Lazarus to come on out, and Lazarus comes on out alive, and he is alive, right? Like he returned, like Jesus returned Lazarus to ordinary earthly life. And that's what he did, and that is mentioned in John 11:38 through 44. And I quote: Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor. For he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And that's the miracle that Jesus did in this story, in this story, right? And that's an amazing miracle. That's an amazing miracle right there. Now to move forward, the rest of the movie gets a lot interesting too. Now there's a couple of other scenes to mention that I actually enjoy. Like there's one scene where Jesus casts out an unclean spirit. Like one of the villagers was crawling in chains, acting like a madman. And of course, this is also a part of the story too. And this is also from the Bible verse of Mark chapter 1, 21 through 28, where Jesus casts out an unclean spirit. He sees this person, and this person who is wrapped up in chains, all dirty, and he cry out saying, and I quote, let us alone, what have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. But Jesus rebuked him, saying, be quiet and come out of him. And when the unclean spirit had convulsed him and cried out with a loud voice, he came out of him. Then they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, saying, what is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. And immediately his fame spread throughout all the region around Galilee. And that's a scene that I really liked too, when he told the unclean spirit to leave, be gone, get out of that person's body, right? And I also like the little detail too of the chains as well. Plus, he was all dirty, so that kind of like symbolizes like, hey, there's like a dirty spirit, but also trapped inside, like around in shackles as well. I like the little details on the shackles too. Nice little detail right there. And another scene to mention was during the was when Walter and Charles were at that Palm Sunday ceremony, and it's when Walter loses the cat, Willa, and we get a moment where Walter sees his father, Charles, picking up Willa while also petting, but at the same time, and it's a nice little transition too. It's like when people were walking by his father, it transitions back and forth between Charles Dickens and Jesus Christ, where Jesus Christ is petting Willa the cat, and for that moment on, Walter begins to understand a lot more, right? He is building that connection between not only him and his father, but also with Jesus as well, showing how both Jesus and Charles Dickens really care, and the fact that they're both holding on to Willow the cat in their arms while petting the cat really shows that there's a sense of love and careness from both Charles and Jesus. And Walter begins to, understand this more. He sees it all right there. Now that was a heartwarming scene right there. One more scene to mention is basically the last act. So I'm gonna talk about the last act. The last act is basically the this is basically where the Passion of the Christ, right? Jesus' last hours before his death, right? And of course, this is where Jesus goes into town. I think it's like the movie mentions Passover, Palm Sunday as well. So just to let you all know, there's a moment in this movie where Jesus goes into the marketplace and realizes that his church is being used like more as a his church or a house of prayer is being turned into like a market site. And of course, this is mentioned in Matthew 21:13, and said unto them, it is written, my house should be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. This is like his house of prayer becomes a den of thieves, right? And and of course there are also like the high Jewish priests or prosecutors, I should say. They were there witnessing it all because they're trying to like tax the market people because the higher priests are trying to like tax bring in more tax for like for the people who are holding these markets, right? And then of course leading up into Jesus' last hours, like the Last Supper. And then of course he realizes that he knows that Judas is going to betray him, and then of course mentions and then says this to Peter when the rooster crows. Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times, right? And that's before the sun rises, and that actually happens. Like Judas betrays Jesus, like when the Roman soldiers came on by. In fact, one of the apostle members cuts off the ears of one of the Romans, and Jesus was able to heal the soldier's ear, right? And it was like one of those like one last miracles that he did before he was arrested, right? And then of course Peter, Peter is basically out in the town trying to he's basically running away too. But of course this is at the point where people there are on 3 occasions people were asking him like, hey, weren't you the follower of Jesus Christ? And Peter denied these occasions 3 times. And of course he kneeled in front of the sun that is shining upon him, and that is before the rooster crows right there. And then we get the moment, and this is a really sad. This is a sad act right there. Like we're now seeing, like, the audience, people are seeing, people including Walter and Charles are seeing what is about to unfold in these very events, right? And we get the moment where Jesus is basically, on trial with Pontius Pilate, who is basically voiced by Pierce Bronson, and I'm actually surprised that this Pierce Bronson voices Pontius Pilate in this movie. Like he does a real good job voicing this character, even though he's on screen for a short amount of time. And of course, Pontius Pilate asks Jesus, "Are you the King of Jews?" And Jesus is like, "You have said so." And of course, Pontius Pilate is like confused for a moment, but of course is like, at one point he doesn't convict Jesus because, like, Jesus did not commit a capital crime, right? But of course, the prosecutors, the prosecutors who brought Jesus forward were basically, they wanted to convict this man, and of course, free this other man too. Pontius Pilate Pontius Pilate just like continues on. It's like, well, this man has done nothing wrong up until the point where it happened. They decided up until it happened, they decided to release the other man, and of course, they decided the people, and of course the people decided to crucify Jesus Christ. Pontius Pilate was the Roman province of Judea, and of course he presided over the trial of Jesus and ultimately ordered his crucifixion, and that's basically what happened, right? Walter sees all of it. This leads into Jesus carrying the cross, and at one moment, the Walter, who's seeing all of it, tries to bring like what looks like a chalice of water, but he accidentally drops it over, and Jesus is like, he is so weary at this point. And also, I forgot to mention, he also got whipped as well. It's still violent, but not as violent as the one that happened in the Passion of the Christ movie that Mel Gibson did. Although you still see the scars on Jesus' back, and I'm pretty sure face as well, in this very movie. And also keep in mind, it's a PG movie too. And this moment leads up to the moment where Jesus is on the cross, calling out for his Father, and then of course was able to inhale and say his last breath, right? Up until the point where he is risen from the dead. Like, he suffered death and was buried and rose again on the third day in accordance of the scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father, right? And at this very moment, before Jesus disappeared up into heaven, we get moments where Jesus is doing his miracles. Like, we see Jesus help the poor blind man. We get the scene where he also helps the man with the stroke. There's also the scene where he saves Peter from drowning, and it's a visually stunning scene in that movie. But this time, instead of Peter, it is Walter who is floating down to the bottom of the ocean, and Jesus grabs him and then brings him back up. But instead, what happens next? Walter floats back up, but Jesus drowns and floats all the way down into the ocean. And then after that, there's a few other scenes too. The next moment is basically just the cross, meaning that Jesus has ascended into heaven. And that's just basically about it. Those are the scenes right there. Those are the scenes that I have really enjoyed in this movie. Plus, the movie ends with Walter telling his brother and sister about the story that his father Charles told him about, and Walter is all excited to share this story for what he heard from his father to now to his brother and sister. And the movie ends with a Bible verse from John the Baptist, John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That alone says it all. that really says it all to end this movie. And that was a really good way to end that movie, especially with that Bible verse. Like the Bible, that Bible verse really means something right there. Now, story wise, I believe the story is really good. This is a really, really good story. Now, granted, it is a lot different from, the actual script. It is still different from the way of how it's written in the scriptures. And then, of course, there's also the King of Kings movies that came out in the 60s as well. But for a movie that is actually a family movie, this is a family movie, by the way. For a film that is a family movie, it helps keep the family engaged while also making the story a lot more interesting and a way for parents to sit down with their kids to tell, right? And this movie should be open to everybody, right? Like I believe everyone needs to see this movie because this story really mentions something too. This story needs to be said to everyone, right? And Angel Studios did a fantastic job with this movie. Not bad for their first animated feature film, I'll say this. Now, of course, the Prince. I know the Prince of Egypt did that too. DreamWorks did the Prince of Egypt, which is a 2D animated movie. Now, do I think the King of Kings movie from Angel Studios? Do I think it will top the Prince of Egypt? It is hard to say because I think Prince of Egypt is an epic film on its own level. So is The King of Kings. I think both of these movies have their own ways to tell a good story, right? And I will say this: I think Prince of Egypt is the more interesting biblical animated feature film. But I'll say this: in my opinion, The King of Kings comes in close second to being a great full length feature length biblical film. I'll say this. And as for the cast, there is the cast in this movie did very good in this movie. I believe the heavy hitters were basically Oscar Isaac as Jesus Christ, Kenneth Branagh as Charles Dickens, and Roman Griffin Davis. Like those were the three heavy hitters who did a fantastic job with this movie. All the other cast members did good too. Uma Thurman did real good playing Catherine Dickens. Mark Hamill as Harad did a very good job voicing the character. And then of course you also have Ben Kingsley who played the high priest Caiaphas. I believe that's how you say his name. He was the one who organized the plot to kill Jesus. I thought Ben Kingsley did a pretty good job voicing this character. And then, of course, there's also other actors who I come to realize that were in this movie, like D. Bradley Baker and James Arnold Taylor. D. Bradley Baker played Willa the cat, making cat noises. James Arnold Taylor played Matthew Philip Thomas and Melchior, and Jim Cummings even played one of the Pharisees, including Dismas and James the Greater. And of course, you also had Vanessa Marshall who played Mary of Bethany. Then you got Mick Wingert as Gaspar. And on top of that, Fred Tatasciore played one of the Pharisees as well. And then Forrest Whitaker as Peter. Like I didn't know that was Forrest Whitaker as Peter. And Pierce Brosnan, I gotta give him credit. Pierce Brosnan played Pontius Pilate in this movie. Like he was only in it for a very short amount of time, but his presence in this movie was important to the story. So Pierce Brosnan playing Pontius Pilate, he did very good in that movie. Now, of course, I think it's also to mention. I know Mark Hamill wasn't in this movie for very long, but he was more of a cameo in that movie too. I mean, Pierce Brosnan and Mark Hamill, they were more. I feel like they were more like They were pretty much cameos in that movie, but they still served a purpose in that story. And Oscar Isaac, this is not the only biblical movie Oscar Isaac was doing. He actually played Joseph in the Nativity Story movie that also came out in 2006, I believe. Yeah, it was 2006. The Nativity Story came out in 2006. So yeah, that was right. And that's just pretty much it. Like the cast members did a really good job in this movie. And that is pretty much it. That is basically my review of this movie. And if I were to rank this movie, I give it a 9 out of 10. The story is good, the acting is good, and wow, I'm at the animation. My goodness, the animation in this movie is really good. I know it's 3D animation, but it works so well. Like It's like some parts of the animation is visually stunning, most particularly the walking on water scene. That was really good, and it almost feels real at times. It's like it almost feels real at times. Like there are times where the animation definitely looks real at times, particularly during some of the story sequences as well, right? But other than that, that is pretty much it. Angel Studios, thank you so much for making this movie. You have truly made a great animated feature film for your studio, and I wish you the best of luck in the future. In the future for other Christian based movies as well. What other movies or projects you're doing right now? Good luck on it. I wish you all the best. And big shout out to all the cast members who provided their acting chops to this movie, including the crew members who were involved in this movie, as well as the writers, directors, producers. You have really hit this out of the ballpark right there, folks. And that is pretty much it. That is my review on the King of Kings movie that came out in 2025. So, anyway, what did you all think of the 2025 King of Kings movies? What did you all think of the 2025 King of Kings movie from Angel Studios? Did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Did you think this movie was okay? I would love to hear your thoughts. But anyway, that is a wrap on this episode. To anybody who's listening, I hope you all have a good Easter weekend. And I hope you all have a good day as well. And this is Mark Codo, aka Codo Man. Thank you for tuning in to Codo Cinema. Remember to watch movies and stay positive.